So the FBI has confirmed what most of us knew. This shooter of Charlie Kirk was demonically driven, whether he was oppressed or possessed. That's for an exorcist to tell us. But he was definitely demonically driven by the demonic ideology of transgenderism. The FBI has confirmed his boyfriend was in the process of transitioning into a woman, sex change operation. They lived together. They were also into this weird cult fetish furryism, where they dress up as animals. It was very demonic. The late Dr. James Dobson warned about this years ago when they were pushing for gay marriage. He said it's just going to be a slippery slope. The left is trying to normalize what did we call them? Trans. We had a different name for them back then, but the left is trying to normalize mental illness. Basically, they're going to say it's all right to have sex with animals. They're going to say it's all right to have polygamy. And he was right. He foreseen what was coming down the pike. Pope Francis said on numerous occasions, transgender ideology is demonic. The demons prey on mentally ill people. The battle is for your mind. When your mind is weak, that's when the devil attacks. So I'm going to show you in politics and in everyday life, we know that we're called to be good citizens, what I believe the church is calling us to do, and in the church, how we should act. And we had a great example, Pope Francis. He called the ideology demonic, but he loved the people. He got criticized actually for having transgender prostitutes come to the Vatican for lunch, but he knew they were demon possessed. He knew they were driven by a demonic ideology, yet he wasn't afraid of them because he followed a great example of Jesus. Luke 8:1-4. Soon afterward, he went on through cities and villages, preaching and bringing the good news of the kingdom of God. And the 12 were with him, and also some women who had been healed of evil spirits and infirmities. Mary, called Magdalene, from whom 7 demons had gone out, and Joanna, the wife of Chuza, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who provided for them out of their means. So one of the greatest saints in church history, Mary Magdalene, was demonically possessed by 7 demons. And these other women that are mentioned there, demonically oppressed. But how did they know to go to Jesus for help? Did Jesus stand on the corner condemning them to hell? No. The verses before there, you see Luke 7:36-50. I'll read it real quick. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and sat at a table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner. Theologians say that's another nice word for prostitute. When she learned that he was sitting at a table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment, and standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisees who had invited him saw it, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman was touching him. What prophet would let a sinner touch him? And Jesus answering him, because Jesus knows what we're thinking, you can't hide anything from Jesus, said, Simon, I have something to say to you. And he answered, what is it, teacher? A certain creditor had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he forgave them both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, to whom he forgave more. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss, but from the time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, your sins are forgiven. Then those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, who is this, who even forgives sins? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. So the woman went in peace, and then right after that, we read about him delivering Mary Magdalene. This was Pope Francis. Not only did he have, the reason he had 10 transgender prostitutes with him for lunch is because he invited all the prostitutes in the city. There was like 1,000 of them, and 10 happened to be transsexual. So the media made a big deal about that and took it out of context, that he was affirming that they were okay. It's okay to be gay, but he wasn't. He wasn't. He was following Jesus' example. Jesus was accused of eating with sinners. Pope Francis was accused of eating with sinners. There's records, documentation of Pope Francis healing sick people. A baby with a hole in her heart, Pope Francis prayed for, and there's documentation the hole closed. So maybe he was delivering transgender demons as well. But you don't do it by shouting and condemning people. You do it by Jesus' example. Welcome them in. So this is where Pope Francis was confused. But make no doubt, he condemned homosexual marriage. He said it steals from the children. He said it was unfair to the children. He condemned transgender ideology as demonic. So as Christians, we have to remember, as angry as we get, we battle not against flesh and blood, but against spiritual principalities. It's so hard for many of us to grasp. We just want to fight. It's our nature to defend our wives and children from this evil in the world. The world is so full of evil. So we need the grace of God to help us live this out. As Pope Francis' example was a great example for me. I have to say that. But we do have to live in this world. We're not of this world. And we have to get involved in politics. Pope Francis was in Argentina. He fought hard against allowing gay marriage. And we fought hard and we won. We won every battle. Every state, including California and New York, when it went up for a vote, it was voted down. I think California, it was 70 to 30 saying no gay marriage. But the left they stacked the deck with the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court overruled the people's will. But there was like 30 states, and every single one of them, well, it wasn't even close, voted no to gay marriage. And this wasn't that long ago. Now the left is trying to get us to accept transgenderism, that it's normal. When just a few years ago, psychologists and psychiatrists would tell you this is a mental illness. If a boy thinks he's a girl, or if a girl thinks he's a boy, it's a mental illness. But they're trying to get us to accept it as normal. They're trying to get us to accept it as normal. And it's a mental illness. And again, the demon attacks the mind. And when he sees a weak mind, he attacks it. And there's no coincidence that the transgender population is like less than 1% of 1% of the United States. But there's been 7 transgenders that go into schools and shoot innocent children. And they're all Christian schools. The last transgender targeted Catholics praying in Mass. Wrote about it, journaled about it. And the media doesn't want you to know, because the media is run by left-wingers. And so we have to fight this, We have to fight this ideology. We can't hate. The left hates. The left is full of hate. You're seeing this with Charlie Kirk's murder. The left is full of hate. We can't be like them. And I don't think we are, because if we would have killed one of their heroes, like they killed Charlie Kirk, there would have been rioting, looting for days and weeks, and the media would have justified it, saying these are peaceful protests, just like they did when Trump was elected, and they burnt down cities. There was 1,500 riots, dozens of people killed by the left, billions of dollars of property damage, and the mainstream media, the lamestream media, as some call it, the legacy media, whatever you want to call it, the basic ABC, NBC, CBS, forget about the cable, they're really whacked out. But then the basic media said, well, this is mostly peaceful protests. No, they were violent, because the left is always violent. The left has always been violent. And before I go into further proving how violent the left is, why the left is so violent, I just want to read you something from the Catholic Encyclopedia on Communism. This is what the Catholic Church thinks of communism. The doctrine, communism, the doctrine that promotes the common sharing of goods while simultaneously denying the right to own private property. Karl Marx was a primary force behind this radical kind of socialism. Communism exalts matter over spirit, hence his philosophy known as dialectical materialism jettisides any notion of a need for God. In addition, economics is believed to be the foundation of civilization. Thus, all other ideas, religious, social, political, depend upon the prevailing economy. The state is supreme in communism and applies a totalitarian grip to the masses, thereby attempting to indoctrinate the people while suppressing any ideas contrary to communism. The church has opposed communism since its beginning. The church has opposed communism since its beginning. In his 1937 Encyclical Divini Redemptoris, Pope Pius XI condemned communism and urged Catholics not to collaborate with communists in political or social endeavors. So what does the Catholic Church support for government? It's called subsidiarity, the principle by which the state acknowledges the rights of the members in a political community. Those in higher authority respect the freedoms and prerogatives of those in lower authority. Catholic social theory has traditionally maintained that political and social action ought not to be taken on by a higher authority when a lower level of competence would suffice. What we call in America limited government. Dr. Robert P. George, a devout Catholic and conservative scholar, was on Blue Collar and a Scholar with me, and he explained it like this. He said, it would be evil for the government to do what a family can do. It would be evil for the government to decide how I should educate my children, where we should live, what church we should go to. That would be evil. That's up to the father and the mother. But then there's certain things in a community that one family couldn't afford. So you want to build a library. So that town would come together and agree on how much they would spend on that library and how they would raise the funds. But then there's some things that are greater that even a small town couldn't afford, it couldn't have the resources for, but it was needed, like roads and bridges. So you would have the state, like the state of Florida, state of New Jersey. And then there were some things that you would need the federal government to protect us from communist China. We need a military, so you need a federal government. But for the federal government to come in, like the liberals in America want, and tell you what school your kids need to go to, and what medicine you're allowed to give them and not allowed to give them, and what medicine they want to force on your kids, that is totalitarianism. And ironically, these killers, these transgenders, especially this last one who just killed Charlie Kirk, he was heavily influenced by Antifa, this organization that's been rioting for years, very violent. In fact, Antifa is called anti-fascist, whatever. They believe they're fighting fascism. They say capitalism is fascism, America is fascism. And their leaders, I've seen them, Their leaders are these, young professors at Harvard and Yale, very educated, very wealthy, but very dumb and very demonically driven. They literally believe and they teach that speech, what I'm saying here, is violent. So it's justified to hit me with a baseball bat across my head or kill me to stop my violent speech, which is the antithesis to an American way, where freedom of speech is a foundational right. The First Amendment gave us freedom of speech. This is why the left, all the left, hates freedom of speech. And in that First Amendment is the freedom of religion. Government has to stay out of our religious institutions and our religious beliefs. They hate that as well. And they hate the Second Amendment that protects us from the government if they try to infringe on the First Amendment, the right to bear arms. That's why they always want to they only want to have the guns. It's like in communist countries, the only people that have the power and the guns are the oppressors, the totalitarianism. And they have these young, mentally ill kids believing that anti-fascism, what they believe to be the opposite, is actually the same. Communism and fascism is just two ways of doing the same thing. The government has total control. The government has control. And the transition to both of them is always socialism and liberalism and progressivism, where you slowly, like the frog in the boiling water, give the government a little bit more control of your lives, a little bit more control of your lives. And I think it was Ben Franklin who wisely said, whoever sacrifices liberty for security deserves neither. And you see, in Florida, year after year after year, the most reliable Republican voters are the Cubans in South Florida, because they had a socialist take over and they seen the evil of socialism and communism. It's the same thing. That you could call it whatever you want to call it. It's statism. It's the state having control over you and your family and your religion, and eventually to get rid of all religion. It's a godless system, and you see these demonic forces in it, and you wonder, like in these communist countries, they don't allow all this weird, furryism and transgenderism. They don't allow it. But in America, they're just trying to get people to accept things they wouldn't ordinarily accept. You probably seen the video years ago. It was popular many years ago, of a KGB who left the KGB, left Russia, came to America, sought refuge, and he told the Americans, this is the Soviet Union's plan, is to peacefully take over, to plant communist professors in your colleges. And you've seen that for years. The most communist professors, especially in, they would like to get into Harvard and Yale and all that. And they did it sneakily. But now they're like, China is in your face. I've showed you reports of this many times. The USA Today, New York Post, even New York Times reported China, the communist Chinese, have donated hundreds of $millions to Columbia, Yale, Harvard. And the communist Chinese are so wicked, they enslave Muslims. They have Muslim camps where they're brainwashing them to become atheists. And they're using their body parts, or selling their body parts, or torture them. It's just wicked. It's just wicked what the communists do to religious people. But yet, these same communists are teaching our kids that the Islamist terrorists are the good guys. ISIS and Al-Qaeda and Hamas are just fighting for freedom. They're the good guys. This is why you see these college students are so confused that they had signs, queers for Palestine. All the queers in Palestine are trying to get into Israel, because that's the only country in the Middle East that don't kill queers for being queer. So it's just an unholy, evil, demonic alliance on the left. But we're winning. I told you time and time again, we're winning. Democrat registration is down by millions. Republican registration is up by millions. We're winning the battle. And even people like Bill Maher, like surprised at how crazy his party's become. He hasn't left his party. He still hates us more, but he's acting surprised. Joe Rogan was so surprised. He was a big Bernie Sanders supporter. And he was so surprised when he's seen how they lie and suppress the truth. Dave Rubin, you know, a gay man who's been married. Even him, he disagrees with our stance on traditional marriage, but he knows that side was so wicked and lied, and they all act surprised. I don't know why they're surprised. Maybe they weren't as in tune to the news as most of us, but I remember being a teenager, a young teenager in the 80s, listening to what ABC, NBC, CBS, that's all we had back then, say about Ronald Reagan, and then hear Ronald Reagan speak. I was like, that's as different as night and day. Hearing what they said Ronald Reagan said and did was as different as night and day to what Ronald Reagan said and did. And I've seen that with every Republican presidential candidate, every presidential politician. But most people, you know, they're busy. They work, whatever. They got families. They didn't pay attention, I guess. But now with social media, they're seeing it. They're seeing it. The truth is coming out. You can't hide this evil ideology. You can't shout us down. You see, the left has always hated free speech. And, you know, they used to shout us down. I remember Ronald Reagan, whenever he would go to a university to speak, the kids would just shout. It was called shouting down. It happened to Trent Horn just recently, went on a university to speak pro-life. And I remember one time Reagan was able to get the kids settled down. And he said, why are you guys so angry? Why won't you let you speak? And one kid raised his hand and he said, go ahead, tell me. And he said, because you have no clue what life is like. When you were growing up, there were no such things as radio and TV. You know, this is in the 80s, and, you know, Reagan was like 80 years old at the time. And Reagan said, yeah, you're right. When I was your age, we didn't have TV and radio to sit around and listen to watch to, because we were too busy inventing it for you. He was a funny guy. But usually they didn't let him speak. I remember Ed Meese, his attorney general, every time he went to speak, they would shout him down. And then you see him with Ben Shapiro not too long ago, where he was threatened. I think he stopped going to universities because his life has been threatened so many times. And these students are so dumb. And these are like Harvard and Yale, but they're so indoctrinated. They were calling him a Nazi. Ben Shapiro is an Orthodox Jew whose ancestors were killed by the Nazis, literally killed in the Holocaust. But because they disagree with him, because he's pro-life, pro-traditional family, he's pro-subsidiarity, limited government, because they disagree with him politically, they think he's a Nazi. And they get this from their professors and their politicians, who admittedly, the Clintons and the Obamas admittedly said one of their favorite authors was Saul Alinsky, who wrote the book Rules for Radicals, how to deal with, you know, how to defeat capitalism. And they said, number one, don't argue with these people. Destroy them. Make them so wicked in the minds of the masses that no one will listen to him. He's a Nazi. He's Hitler. He's garbage. He's deplorable. That's all Saul Alinsky's tactics. Another thing he said was, the issue is never the issue. So they always flip the script and talk about things that's not even the issue, and accuse us things that are lies, like outright lie about us, you know? You just seen Stephen King, a left-winger, from Hollywood. He tweeted out that he was happy. A lot of these left-wingers are happy that a 31-year-old father of two was murdered. This is how evil the ideology is, so demonic. They were happy because he would stone gays. In fact, he was criticized in the conservative movement because he was so accepting of gays coming in. He got a lot of gay people to vote for Trump last time. A lot of conservatives were like, man, we don't need these people in our party. He's like, yeah, we need as many people as we can to vote for us. And, let's try and change their minds. But if they agree with us on 90% of the issues, we need to get them in our party. Even Dave Rubin, who I spoke of early, who left the Democrats, said that him and his husband met Charlie Kirk and his wife, and they were the most pleasant, loving people, even though Charlie Kirk stood firm that he's against gay marriage. He said they talked, and this is what the left hates. They hate conversation. They say they want dialogue and conversation, but they don't. Because every time Charlie Kirk was known, like he would go up with a sign, change my mind. And he would open the mic and let all the liberals talk. He was a champion of free speech, and they killed him because they hate free speech and they love violence. This is who we're dealing with. So we have to be wise as serpents, but innocent as doves. And what does that mean? We fight them politically, we defeat them politically, so they can't put in places laws that endanger our children, like the Biden administration pushing transgender in the schools, pushing transgender on our children, allowing 10-year-old kids to be chemically castrated. This is demonic. This is demonic. So we have to fight them, we have to beat them, and we have to pray. But we can't be like them. We cannot hate like them. We have to love like Jesus. And this is an old saying. When I was a Protestant Christian, I said it. When I've been a Catholic Christian for the past 10 years, I'll say it. Hate the sin, but love the sinner. And if you do this, you'll probably be misjudged like Pope Francis or Pope Leo right now is starting to be misjudged as well. But don't worry about what men think of you. Worry about what God thinks about you. God bless and stay Catholic.